The US announces sanctions against the Palestinian leadership, saying that it's undermined peace efforts. It comes as the war in Gaza still rages and the push for Palestinian statehood is gaining momentum. So, what are the implications of the US decision? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Adrian Finighan. In a move that surprised many observers, the US State Department has imposed sanctions on the Palestinian leadership. The Trump administration accuses members of the Palestinian Liberation Organization and officials of the Palestinian Authority of undermining peace efforts. It comes as more Western governments are openly criticizing Israel, calling on it to end the war on Gaza and move towards a two-state solution. And as more countries announce their intention to recognize Palestinian statehood, albeit with conditions. Among the discussions, growing support for Hamas to disarm and for a reformed Palestinian Authority to govern Gaza. So what's behind the US sanctions? Are they a bargaining chip to further peace talks or a sign of more hurdles ahead? We'll explore all those questions with our guests in just a moment. But first, a report from Katia Lopez-Horayan.
Both the U.S. and Israel boycotted this United Nations conference, which addressed a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. Multiple countries agreed Hamas should disarm and the Palestinian Authority should govern Gaza instead. Days later, the U.S. announced it was sanctioning PA officials and members of the Palestine Liberation Organization, accusing them of internationalizing their conflict with Israel at the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice.
These actions reflect our national security interests and our commitment to holding the PLO and PA accountable for undermining the prospects for peace.
The sanctions come as recognition of Palestinian statehood is gaining momentum in France, Canada, and the UK. This despite renewed pushback from the US and Israel.
The intention of several European countries to recognize a Palestinian state is a reward for terrorism.
The Palestinian Authority was established in the 1990s as an interim body to pave the way towards an independent state. But for decades, it's been accused of corruption, poor leadership, and being out of touch with Palestinians. The PA lost control of Gaza to Hamas in 2007, but has continued to govern parts of the occupied West Bank. Under its leadership, the demolition of Palestinian homes has increased, and illegal Israeli settlements have expanded. Recently, the Israeli parliament approved a symbolic motion to completely annex the occupied West Bank.
It's all documented by historians. To create a Jewish state in Palestine, which was 93% Arab in 1915 or so, that they had to get rid of the Palestinians somehow. And this is what colonialism is all about, and settler colonialism.
But despite its failings, some Western nations say a reformed Palestinian Authority is better suited to govern Gaza once Israel's war is over. Washington's unwavering support for Israel is dividing even some of President Trump's most staunch allies, causing a rift among his support base. It's unclear if these sanctions against Palestinian leaders will advance or derail progress towards a two-state solution. Katia Lopez-Horayan, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
So let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Ramallah is Xavier Abu Eid, a former advisor to the Palestine Liberation Organization and author of Rooted in Palestine. From New York, we're joined by Eli Clifton, a senior advisor at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. And from London, we're joined by Firas El-Ishi, a journalist and host of the Here's Why podcast. Welcome to you all. Xavier, we'll start with you. The State Department didn't name those that it was targeting with these sanctions, essentially travel bans. Could this be, do you think, an attempt to prevent the Palestinian leadership, President Mahmoud Abbas, from attending the UN General Assembly, where France, Canada and perhaps Britain intend to formally recognize a Palestinian state? Why would the US want to do that?
It could be, but at the same time, I would say that this announcement is way more about messaging than it is about substance. The PLO effectively has been sanctioned by the United States for many years. Let's remember that under the first Trump administration, the PLO mission in Washington was closed, and at the same time, the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem was also shuttered. So I think what the U.S. is trying to do at this stage, they're trying to counter this wave of recognitions that are coming out internationally for many reasons. First of all, because the U.S. has proven not to have any clear policy for what's happening here. They have failed miserably so far in Gaza and elsewhere. But also because many of what the U.S. may consider to be their allies are taking initiatives by their own, including the United Kingdom, Canada, and France. So from that perspective, I think it goes way beyond the United Nations, and it's mainly about setting a message that the U.S. is still relevant here, and they will be able to advance or not any process. But it's not much about the substance, because once again, the sanctions have been there for a while.
Eli, how, according to the US, have the Palestinian Authority and the PLO undermined prospects for peace and not complied with their commitments? Presumably, this is going to be very dry, but presumably this is a reference to the Middle East Compliance Act of 2002 and UN Security Council resolutions 242 and 338. So what is the US saying that they have done or have not done?
Well, I mean, I think as was just discussed, this is yet another symbolic gesture. This is not going to have, I think, any long-term impact, much as I believe the announcements about potential recognition of a Palestinian state by the UK and by Canada as well. None of these, be it the UK or Canada's actions or now the Trump administration's, are going to have a meaningful impact on resolving what is a crisis, a famine occurring in real time in Gaza. And this isn't just something that is flying under the radar somehow and is being overlooked, and these bigger distractions are somehow of greater political salience. It's far from that. These are not going to turn away the attention of the global public, let alone the American public, where domestic opinion is really starting to tilt towards saying we need to have different policies vis-a-vis Israel. The U.S.-Israel relationship is dysfunctional, is what so many voters are expressing, saying that there actually do need to be conditions on U.S. aid to Israel. None of this is going to resolve those outstanding issues. Actually, this is going to turn into a greater domestic political pressure on the Trump administration as time plays out on this. I think that you can dig into the details of this, saying, well, okay, sanctioning members of the PA is certainly undermining future prospects for the day after in Gaza. It raises questions about how the United States can engage with the PLO going forward. I think those are really on the margins of the relevancy of what's going on here. I think, as was just discussed, what this shows is an incoherent policy planning process. It shows an execution of policies that are simply inconsistent with those being expressed by Donald Trump, where he has said that he finds the pictures and images coming out of Gaza to be very concerning. The famine is clearly something that actually has impacted him at some level in the comments he made. I believe it was from Air Force One, and it shows the lack of the political awareness that this administration, then this campaign had during the November election, when they actually made meaningful outreach to Palestinian Americans in Michigan.
You make an interesting point there about U.S. domestic reaction, which we'll return to in a few minutes, Eli. Firas, why shouldn't the Palestinian Authority and the PLO seek international justice for alleged Israeli war crimes, given the indiscriminate killing of more than 60,000 people in Gaza, the deliberate starvation of its population, and the fact that illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank have increased since October 7th, 2023, as has violence against Palestinians there? What else are they supposed to do?
I mean, exactly. I'm sorry to say this on air, but they're expected to die until the very last one, or to go to other countries and be completely displaced. I mean, Hamas is being condemned for using violence, and now you have the PA being condemned for using diplomacy. what should I do? I'm joining you for this question. Unfortunately, the U.S. doesn't care much, no matter what Trump says. I don't believe in this whole negotiating process, trying to find peace process anymore. And the reason is this extraordinary, horrific famine that's happening right now. And I don't want the world to be distracted from that, because that's the main issue right now. No matter what they say, no matter what punishments or procedures or whatever they do, there is an actual famine happening, and hundreds of children are dying every day. And the fact that, the entire public opinion in the US is shifting, and the US government is not willing to follow, is saddening, and is worrying about the American democracy for this moment. But this is a world we live in where the United States right now is willing to sacrifice its alignment with its allies. Clearly, Canada, the UK, and France are deciding to take a clear shift towards, standing by their values. It's as simple as that. The United States is willing to be morally corrupted and to go as far as they can into that direction to please Israel. This is saddening. This is worrying about the world that we live in. As I said, we live in a world where there are conflicts all over. There's the Ukrainian war. There's perhaps a future conflict that might happen in far Asia between Taiwan and China. And the United States is the country that we often looked up as the compass for morals, as the compass for human values, for all the things that they lectured us with after World War II. But this is just bringing the very worst out of the American administration and their foreign policy. So for this moment, it's just an act of desperation. And I'm scared of this Donald Trump fragile ego extending to U.S. foreign diplomacy.
All right, Eli, I saw you nodding there. Do you want to pick that up?
Yeah.
Is this a distraction tactic by the Trump administration, an act of desperation?
I would say the problem goes even greater than that. The issue here isn't just limited to the United States. Indeed, everything that was said is absolutely accurate. I would just point out as well that, as you started off by saying, that the making this about the peace process, one which certainly most policy analysts have lost most, if all, faith in, is really an incredibly disingenuous move, both by the Trump administration as well as potentially by the UK and Canada, when the issue here is not about recognition of a Palestinian state, not in the near term. That is not going to change the facts on the ground in Gaza. That is not going to change the facts on the ground with regards to weapons shipments coming from, Canada is part of the supply chain for the F-35, for instance. The UK has also been, a major exporter of weapons and supporter of Israel. And to really take on the issue of what's going on in Gaza, the Gaza war dragging into, its 20th, 21st month now, the fact that now we are seeing the famine that we have been warned was imminent, actually coming to fruition with no meaningful effort to try to resolve it. Still, Israel not allowing in the significant amount of food and medicine that would be required to feed the population. All goes to the fact that this is not maybe a distraction, maybe it's a looking the other direction, maybe it's we can speculate about why these countries are engaging in this manner, but the point of the matter is that the controversy that's being stirred up here via discussion of recognition of a Palestinian state or sanctioning members of the PA all fail to actually address what's going on here, or the fundamental problems of the relationship between the UK, Canada, the US in particular, and Israel.
Javier, feel free to come in on that. But this US announcement comes just after the UN conference held this week, hosted by France and Saudi Arabia, aimed at working towards a two-state solution. Now, at that conference, several countries signed on to the New York Declaration, an agreement that calls on Hamas to disarm and surrender control of the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority, which both the US and Israel went on to reject outright. Why? Why would the US be so opposed to the Palestinian Authority running Gaza again?
I think there are two reasons to explain that. On one side is the lack of policy. They don't know what they want. They don't understand how they're going to get anywhere because they don't have a vision. Now, unlike the first Trump administration, people that are in charge of Middle East policy, and particularly Israel, Palestine, are not as extreme as people like Jason Greenblatt or David Friedman that would not tolerate the term Palestinian state. But at the same time, the US now is not even talking about a statehood. And the only thing that we have heard so far is a plan of ethnic cleansing in Gaza. Now, from the other side, I think the US would like to keep control over any sort of process. I fully agree with Ian when he says that it is ingenious to argue that this is about the peace process. It's not about the peace process because there is no peace process. And if it is about Palestinian-US relations, I don't think the US ever had a Palestinian Authority that was more willing to engage with the terms imposed by the US. Let's remember that even during the bombardments, for example, of Iran, the PA did not issue any statement of condemnation, but issued a statement of condemnation of the Iranian attack on a US base in Qatar. And several other steps, like, for example, welcoming Mike Huckabee, who is a very ideologue US ambassador to Israel, someone who supports annexation, who calls for a Palestinian state to be declared in France or elsewhere, but not here. He was welcomed just last week by the Palestinian Prime Minister and the Deputy President. So it's a PA that it's totally willing to engage under the terms that are being imposed, or some of those terms, and yet what you hear are sanctions. So this is not an incentive for anyone to engage with the Trump administration.
Firas, the US has issued a series of sanctions in recent months, seemingly designed to weaken individuals and entities that have been critical of Israel. In June, it sanctioned judges on the International Criminal Court who were involved in the decision to issue arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and the former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. And of course, earlier this month, it sanctioned the Special Rapporteur at the UN, Francesca Albanese, whose job is to monitor the human rights of Palestinians. Is there any doubt then that this is a deliberate policy by the Trump administration?
This is totally a deliberate policy. This is Donald Trump getting close to his Israeli friends. This is Donald Trump giving personal service. This is Donald Trump extending his powers as a president to serve AIPAC and to serve the Zionist lobby within the United States. It's nothing else because obviously even in the Senate and the Congress, the vote is split and people are turning against Israel. So for now, it's nothing but a personal favor. By the way, it will be one of the greatest things this year to watch Francesca Albanese win the Nobel Prize of Peace. We're all crossing fingers for her. What she's been doing is amazing, and a lot of great people around that. But for now, we're going to keep an eye on the other countries because the United States is being very clear that it's not a moderator. It's a close friend to Israel, and it will stand by Israel against all the values and all the allies and everything till the very last moment. So for now, we keep a close eye on the EU, who are planning sanctions, who are planning to break this whole thing that Israel and this whole situation that Israel is imposing today. And as we speak, there are German and French aircrafts flying over Gaza and throwing aid. Emmanuel Macron posted a tweet saying that it's not enough, that in the coming weeks they will force the situation to move. And yes, the GHF has to be moved out as soon as possible. Note that, and sorry for keep talking about the famine, because for me that's the priority. Note that the GHF, since they started distributing food, 20% of the daily killings, I'm not saying deaths, I'm saying killings that are happening in Gaza are happening at the food distribution points, whether it's shootings or stampedes. So for now, the situation is dire, and only that situation should be highlighted. All this, it's part of the Trump administration usual flood the information, flood the media with distractions. Let's talk about everything else. Let's not talk about the real issue. There is an unprecedented famine. I'm watching World War II documentaries. It was not this bad.
I get that, Firas. Eli, the US is also opposed to efforts to bring Israel to account for human rights abuses, and arguing that neither it nor Israel is subject to the international court's jurisdictions. Help me understand this in terms of international law. Does that argument hold any weight at all?
Well, certainly not outside U.S. borders, that's for sure. What was just said a moment ago, and this reference to sort of this incoherent policy planning, I think is very, very important to understand. This isn't just about the Trump administration. Certainly the pushing back and saying we're going to ignore, if not sanction, those who try to enforce international law is not unique to the Trump administration. This is the same trap that the previous administration fell into. This is exactly what played a significant role in the loss experienced in the last election by Kamala Harris and by Joe Biden. They were aware. They wanted to have it both ways. They were acknowledging that there was this humanitarian crisis occurring in Gaza. They were acknowledging at some level that their own base, their own political base, was no longer on board with this knee-jerk defense of Israel, both in international forums as well as providing unbelievable amounts of military aid to Israel, the largest recipient of U.S. military aid in the world. And the Trump campaign at the time seemed to have acknowledged and realized that this was actually becoming a political liability for Joe Biden and the previous administration. And they sought to capitalize on that. Now, I'm not saying that, campaign promises are always kept or anything like that, but purely looking at the experience of his predecessor, Donald Trump surely must have in his mind that he doesn't want to fall into that same trap, losing his own base on this in order to appease his biggest campaign donors like the Adelson family, or to somehow give in to whatever pressures the Israel lobby, AIPAC, and Netanyahu are able to bring on him, because that may run counter to his own domestic political agenda. And we're seeing that happen right now, where there's now a meaningful split occurring within the Republican Party. You see really high-profile people that were associated with being sort of the mouthpieces of MAGA, like Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon, starting to say, hey, this is actually really wrong, and this isn't consistent with the America First and Make America Great Again ideology that brought Donald Trump into the White House 2 times. So I think that there's something very dangerous happening here for this administration, where, again, they saw what happened to the predecessor. They were able to capitalize on that problem at the time for Joe Biden, and they're risking falling into that very same trap, and it's happening right now.
Javier, I just want to come back to the State Department statement where the US accuses the Palestinian Authority and the PLO of inciting and glorifying violence and of, quote, supporting terrorism by providing payments and benefits to Palestinian terrorists. That's what the statement says. What does it mean by that? What are the PA and the PLO actually doing?
This is the entire endorsement by the U.S. State Department of Israeli government talking points, because there is nothing at all of what they are presenting. In fact, the President Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, a few months ago, they had already given to the U.S. one of the most important steps that the U.S. was asking the Palestinian side to take, which was to put an end to the system of payments for Palestinian prisoners and prisoner families. And even at that time, the U.S. administration, the Trump administration, praised the Palestinian Authority for doing so. Now, when we are talking about incitement, they could give examples of incitement, because all incitement I see here are Israeli ministers calling for a genocide against the Palestinian people. If they can point out one single Palestinian official calling for any sort of incitement, they should also present this. But they base a lot of this in so-called think tanks that are even led by Israeli settlers and very far right-wing people in Israel, that they just repeat all the slogans without much substance.
Firas, does the US move help or
sorry,
hit?
I would like to follow up with that if I can. Because the only violence following the news, the only violence the PA incited is one against Palestinians. Because whenever the IDF had raids on camps in the West Bank, it was the PA police that helped. When they needed to shut Al Jazeera offices in the Palestinian territory, it was the PA that actually supported that. When there's Palestinian taxpayer money that's being withheld, the PA doesn't contest that. So in many ways, the PA actually served the Israelis and served against this narrative. So the fact that we see this now, it makes no sense whatsoever.
Okay, and the question I was going to put to you was, does the US's move help or hinder efforts to end the war, to end the starvation? Where does it now leave the two-state solution?
it will further complicate it. And it also shows that this is an effort to actually abolish the whole idea of a two-state solution. Because in order to negotiate the two-state solution, and in order to further, after this, negotiate the normalization with the other Arab countries, you would still need a Palestinian Authority. Obviously, it's not going to be Hamas for clear reasons. So who are you going to negotiate with? The one elected authority is the PA. And further down the road, I don't see a political solution without it. So this is an intentional effort to actually block the peace process and block the idea of a two-state solution.
And Eli, you talked about Trump being at odds with voices in certainly the MAGA, the Make America Great Again wing of his party. He's also out of step, isn't he, with international opinion right now, it would seem.
Absolutely. And, as was just said, listen, we're further than we ever have been from a meaningful peace process and anything resembling a two-state solution. Plenty of experts would say that the window has actually truly closed on that. But let's talk more near term here. What does the day after in Gaza look like? Well, most plausible scenarios that have been put forward of something that could be remotely acceptable to Israel and to the region would involve having the PA involved in sort of reinstalling the PA as the government in Gaza. Obviously, that's easier said than done. There's all sorts of problems in how you would finally get there. That doesn't alleviate the famine that's occurring right now. But that was sort of, something that kept being floated. Well, now it seems as if the Trump administration has taken a huge step backwards towards that, which brings us to, so what is the other possible outcomes that the United States might find to be acceptable, that Israel might find acceptable, or that both parties could somehow impose, certainly against the will of the people in Gaza? And I think that one has to then ask, well, what is the U.S. position toward Israeli annexation of Gaza? That has been essentially the direction that they've moved in the West Bank. That now appears to be the direction that's left for Gaza. What's left if you're going to say that the PA is somehow a force that's not to be worked with, a force that's going to be sanctioned, a force that supposedly works and encourages terrorism? Well, that starts to create a vacuum of what's left. And I think then we have to be asking some bigger questions about, so is the day after in Gaza that it is absorbed into Israel? And what does that mean for the population that is currently there?
Javier, we've got about 30 seconds. Do you just want to add to that?
No, I think the summary of our discussion is that the U.S. lacks of any policy. This is much more about messaging, and they are just trying to present how anti-Palestinian they can be in order to gain more concessions from the Palestinian side. I still don't think that it's going to work for them.
Okay. Gentlemen, there, we're going to have to end it. Many thanks indeed. Javier Abu Eid, Eli Clifton, and Firas El Ishi. And thank you for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website. That's at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle there at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. We'll see you again. Bye for now.
Don't miss out and get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.